Hey, friends. Hey, thank you so much. Like, sincerely, thank you for joining me for another episode of the So What Does That Look Like Bible Study. That title is a nod to this rhetorical question. Does that ancient old book actually have information, practical tips, knowledge that is relative to us living Christian lives today? Absolutely, it does. And for this month, for the month of September, we are going to examine, so, what does it look like to navigate bloody bloodlines? Like, does the Bible talk to us about that taboo topic? This sense of being able to say out loud that sometimes in our family units, amongst our brothers and sisters, mothers and daughters, fathers and daughters, husbands and wives, grandparents and grandkids, everything is not just perfect. Everything is not peachy keen. There's actually some trepidation that occurs. Does the Bible actually talk to us about that? Well, yes, it does. And we are going to look at that topic this month, bloody bloodlines. Thank you again for joining me. Bloody bloodlines. What does the Bible actually say about that? Well, if you'll join me right here in Genesis chapter number 4, we are going to jump to, I'm going to verse number 1. We'll just start with verse number 1. I'll give you a quick backdrop. That's where we are introduced to the parents of two brothers, Adam and Eve. They are the first man, first wife, first husband, first wife, first man, first woman on earth. And they have children. They have Cain, and then later they have Abel. And so, this is one thing that I want you to just kind of know as we delve into this whole Bloody Bloodline series. Dysfunctional families, that is like something that has existed since the beginning of time, literally showing up right here in the first family that is on the earth. And we can also know as context that that's rooted in sin. That's rooted in the open door that Adam and Eve's sin has allowed to come into the earth realm. So if you are sometimes feeling as if, is my family the only folk who act like this? Are we the worst ones, the only ones, anything like that? You can know, hands down, dysfunctional family interchanges and exchanges have been in place since the beginning of time. So in Genesis chapter 4, with Adam and Eve, first woman, first man, first husband, first wife, their children, we see where that begins to roll out. Adam and Eve again have Cain, and then they have Abel. And so, of course, they've grown up and time has passed, because at the time that this is introduced, it says this: in the course of time, Cain brought some of his fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. In verse number 4, and Abel also brought an offering of his fat portions, of his best portions, from some of his firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked with favor on the offering that Abel brought. That becomes kind of obvious. Like, why? Why does he look with favor on Abel's offering? Well, the Bible distinctly lets us know that Cain just brought some. Abel brought his best. Abel brought of his fat portions, and he gave that unto the Lord. So clearly know then that Abel had no input really on what Cain brought to the Lord. Cain really didn't have input on what Abel brought. Both of them brought what they desired to bring to the Lord, as based, I guess, upon what was in their hearts, right? As a quick sidebar, Cain was a farmer, and so he brought produce from the ground. Abel was a shepherd, and so he brought of his flock. So that right there is the quick context. And then the Lord said to Cain, because Cain became very angry and his face was downcast, why are you angry, Cain? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is at your door and it desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now, Cain, he said to his brother Abel, let's go out into the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. So, therein in verse number 8 is where the first murder actually occurs. Cain has been first, Cain has made a choice to just bring some of his produce to the Lord, right? God corrects him, of course, out of love, but God tells him, you have opportunity to get that right. Instead of getting that right, get this, Cain becomes angry with Abel. He tells Abel, come on out here into this field, right? Obviously, Abel goes, and when they're out in the field, Cain kills his own brother. It wasn't out of a quick, angry reaction, it was actually premeditated. It was homicide. It was murder. It was intentional. It was not an accident. It was not a rash movement. It was thought through and planned because he's corrected by the Lord, and then he intentionally lures his brother into a place of non safety so that he can do harm to him. Then the Lord, in verse number 9, said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? Now get this. um, the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? And Cain replies, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? The Lord said, what have you done? Listen, Cain, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now, Cain, you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which once opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood by your hand. When you work the ground, it would no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer, a fugitive in the earth realm. Do you think at this point Cain would have fallen to his knees? He would have begun to cry, be remorseful, apologetic, any of that? This is what I want you to see about Cain's character. In verse 13, after all of that, Cain is the one who's chosen to bring the poor offering to God. Cain is the one that God corrects and says, but you still have opportunity to get it right. Cain is the one who becomes jealous and envious of his brother and lures him away into the field. Cain is the one who premeditates and chooses to murder his brother. Cain is the one who receives the correction and the curse that says the ground will no longer yield crops for you and you will be a fugitive. And this is how Cain responds in verse 13. Cain says to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence, and I will be a restless fugitive on the earth, and whoever finds me, Lord, they're going to kill me. Really, Cain? Now you're concerned about being out of the presence of the Lord? In verse 15, but the Lord said to him, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times. So the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out of the Lord's presence, and he lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Therein is that simple backdrop, bloody bloodlines. We see here where a brother literally attacks his blood brother and kills him. It's the first family, they are the first brothers, they are the first children, and it is the first murder in the earth realm. So we're just going to talk about that for a minute as I have prepared and thought about this particular Bible study for an extended period of time now. I am just praying over the listeners that the Bible study accomplishes what the true intention is, which is simply this. It is to help those of us who are in less than ideal family scenarios, one, to get to know that the Bible really does address those issues, and two, that you would leave with tangible tips of application that can help you navigate this very sensitive topic productively and Christ-like. I'll also say the opposite side of it. It is not to trigger anything. It is not to cause greater harm or damage. It is not to send forth any of us in judgmental stances, pushing and picking out different people from amongst our family. It is simply a Bible study that is attempting to address a very real issue according to biblical principles and give you tangible tips and takeaways. So, with that being said, I pray God's peace over the participants and over the hearers, and we're going to just go ahead and proceed with the word. What are some tangible tips that we can just take from this scenario? Because at this point, Abel has been murdered. And so, in looking at this, then largely what we see is the activity of Cain and the response of God. Abel is, as the Lord describes, he's in the ground. The brother's blood is crying out from the ground. And so let's just go right there then. What can I learn from this? How do I navigate those bloody bloodlines? Well, this is what I would say as my tangible tip number one. I want, in just going all the way to Genesis, the first book in the Bible, the first family in the Bible, the first siblings in the Bible, and recognizing that in that space, this jealousy and this murder occurs. I want to first, as a tangible tip, allow us then to embrace, to become validated by this sense of knowing that this type of family dynamic is real. You are not crazy. You're not imagining things. You're not envisioning things. You're not being overly sensitive. The fact that this happened way back in biblical days, as early as the first family, it is a nod to the reality that these types of things happen. I highlight this because sometimes when we have in a culture or societal way of being, this ideal notion that families are supposed to be perfect and lovey-dovey and everybody's friends and rooting for each other, when we are experiencing otherwise and no one is really talking about that, it can begin to play on us mentally, and we can begin to wonder, is it me? Am I just imagining stuff? Am I just making things up? Am I being too super sensitive about everything? Was that really jealousy? Did my sister just say that particular thing? Did my dad actually try to backstab me, or did my cousin actually, like, you can really kind of wonder, is something wrong with me? Well, if nothing else, then here's tangible tip number one. Really know that negative family interchanges and interactions, they're real. They exist. You're not making it up. It's not just in your head. And here's a tangible biblical example of that right here in Genesis chapter number 4. The Bible's not even long way from, way far in being written. We're not even at verse or chapter number 56 or something of that nature, right here in Genesis chapter 4. So, tangible tip number one, come to the full awareness that is real. That is real. And if that is you today and you are experiencing those types of dynamics, in this odd kind of way, first I want to just acknowledge that. I want to apologize for that as well, but I want to acknowledge that and to give this ironic bidding of peace to you in knowing that what you're sensing and what you're feeling is valid. Tangible tip number two. It is another bit of awareness. What would I say would be tangible tip number two? Is simply this. When verse number 5 says, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do what is not right, Sin is at your door. You have to rule over it. Here's awareness number two. Oftentimes, whatever that dysfunctional emotion is, whether it's jealousy or envy or covetousness or hatred, that you may feel is being cast towards you, and so you've been trying to mitigate yourself and massage yourself and examine yourself to figure out how you can get your family member, brother, sister, cousin, mom, dad, grandmother, auntie, uncle, whatever that is, to be more accepting of you, to figure out what you can do, what you can adjust to make them love you, to make them like you. When we look at this particular passage, this was between Cain and his God. Abel had not done anything to initiate or deserve Cain's harsh feelings towards him. I say all of that to get back to tip number two. Recognize that oftentimes, when it comes to the dysfunctional relationship between a family member and perhaps yourself, someone else, it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with that person and their own inner issues and turmoil, and nothing that you do to tweak you will heal what's not well on the inside of the other person. Cain's junk, Cain's self work, Cain's issues, that was between Cain and God. I have to highlight that because if you look at the passage, Cain is the one who opted to bring what he brought. Cain is the one that became angry. Cain is the one that did not take advantage of the Lord's opportunity when he said to him, "You can do better and get it right." Cain is the one who got jealous. Cain is the one who plotted to kill his brother. Cain is the one who killed his brother. Cain is the one who lied when God asked him, "Where is your brother?" Cain is the one, even when the Lord says, gives him his consequences, where he complains about the consequences being too harsh. He doesn't become remorseful about his actions. He complains about the consequences becoming too harsh, and even says to God, "You're the one driving me out of the land," not accepting responsibility for his behavior that it led up to these scenarios. I have often heard in family dynamics, conversations between siblings or cousins or whatever that looks like, where one family member is trying to blame the other family for their circumstances and their issues. And sometimes they can even guilt the other family member into feeling like, "Well, you got all the shots, or you got all the breaks, or you were the favorite, or you were the one everybody liked, or you don't know how tough my life was." And sometimes you're looking around, dude, we were raised in the same house. Sis, you had the same. And you can spend a whole lot of energy trying to explain that, and a whole lot of energy then trying to be less than who you are, to kind of make that person feel better or to make that person like you a little bit more. But when we look here at Cain in the Bible, tip number two is validated again and again. Is be at peace with yourself, because the issues that this particular sibling, this brother was dealing with, it had absolutely nothing to do with Abel. It was all about Cain and his own character, and all about Cain and his relationship with the Lord. It's funny, even when you find yourself sometimes being teased and taunted, even about your relationship with the Lord. I can imagine that even here, Abel brought his best to God, but it was really between Abel and God. Why Cain looked over there at Abel and got all jealous about Abel and God's relationship, when he could have had the exact same relationship with God himself based on their own dynamics. That type of stuff, that type of way of trying to mitigate all of those things. Now, whether your success is seen in your relationship with the Lord, your success is seen with your business, your success is seen with your family, your success is seen with you excelling at work, whatever that is, and you're trying to play that small and make that look different to accommodate a family member who may be jealous or displeased with it. Tip number two, be at peace with yourself. Let the responsibility of that person, that family member, lie with that family member. You are not responsible for that. It seems quite simple, but I know that it's easier said than done. So you can begin the journey of reshaping how you've tried to play yourself small to be better received by family members. In this case, there was nothing that Abel had to do with this scenario. This was all between Cain and Cain and God. Again, hear me, friends. That was between Cain and Cain and God. Tangible tip number two: be at peace with yourself. To tangible tip number three, I want us to take note right here in verse number 8. It says, "Now Cain said to his brother Abel, 'Let's go out to the field.' And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him." So again, as I mentioned earlier, Abel is already deceased at this point. He's already murdered, and he can't talk to us. He can't give us his verbal words to talk to us. But I think we can look at this scenario and get a lesson here. Abel probably very much trustworthily, because it's his brother. He follows him out into the field, probably because his heart is pure towards his brother. He has no real notion or idea that Cain is planning to murder him. So you just kind of layer those two factors together. And when his brother Cain says, "Come into the field," Abel goes. So, tangible tip number three, I would just simply phrase it like this: use wisdom on how you engage, even when it's family. Use wisdom on how you engage, even when it's family. So Abel follows his brother into the field and he's murdered there. Again, Abel probably has very pure intentions towards his brother Cain, and thus he's very trusting and willing to go wherever his brother kind of suggests that he goes. What we have to come to in layering our tips, and in tip number one, um, being allowing ourselves to embrace that this type of dysfunction is real. And tip number two, being at peace with ourselves, not trying to minimize or pretend or play it small to accommodate the negativity of a family member. Then we have to layer that with number three, and recognizing that that's a very real thing. We have to use wisdom in how we engage. There are just certain circumstances and situations, even when it's family, that we should not put ourselves in. We should not choose to willingly go into those spaces. In this particular scenario, of course, Cain physically murders Abel. And he is now dead, like physically dead. And I say this, that sometimes it's not that our family member has actually utilized physical harm towards us. And in some cases now, that is the case. But in some cases, it's not. It's not necessarily a physical harm that is like murder to our actual physical being. But there are cases, though, where that harm can be to our self esteem, that harm can be to our reputation, that harm can be to our finances, that harm can be to our dreams, that harm can be to our character. And while they're not physically murdering us, they're murdering everything about us and around us. That harm can be to our family, that harm can be to our immediate family or other family members. Like, harm can exist in those scenarios. And sometimes, because it's family, we can just want to be a part. We can just want to be at the gathering. We can just want to be at the hangout night. We can just want to be at a particular place with them because we don't want to feel excluded. And we don't want to continue to excavate what is already a distancing between us. But what I'm telling you, based on this particular scenario, that just because it's family does not always mean that it is a safe space, not just physically, but sometimes mentally, sometimes emotionally, sometimes spiritually, sometimes financially, sometimes relationship wise for us to dwell in. And we have to choose not to go there, not to engage there, not to accept every invitation, not to respond to every conversation, not to be engaged in every dynamic if those things do not make us well. That's my tangible tip number 3. Based on this particular text, when Abel accepted the invitation or the instructions of his brother and went with him in goodwill and trust, it was to his demise. It was because his brother had poor intentions towards him. And sometimes we can have the best of intentions towards family members, and those family members may not have the best of intentions towards us. And so, tangible tip number 3 is that we have to use wisdom on how and when to engage, even when it's a family member. Now, I'm going to summarize with this. I won't belabor the point of the Bible study. Again, the series for the month of September is Bloody Bloodlines. When family is foe. And in examining Cain and Abel's story, even though Abel has been murdered, we can look at the passage in Genesis chapter 4 and still get some powerful takeaways that allow us to have tangible tips for application to our lives today. Number 1, tangible tip number 1 was for us to embrace that this dysfunctional dynamic in families, it's real. Number 2, it was to be at peace with ourselves. And we discussed and looked at how no amount of changing, no amount of tweaking of himself could have adjusted all of the inner turmoil that was happening in Cain because of Cain's own issues with himself and Cain's issues with God. And then tangible tip number 3 was to use wisdom on when to engage, even if it's family. Now, here's what's comforting about this. Throughout the entire scenario, God is there. God sees and he knows. God is not asleep. He's not slumbering. God sees and he knows. And for someone today, that may be the actual comfort that you need. This awareness that you're not alone, that God sees the nuances and the details. He sees your heart towards your family, and he sees your family's heart towards you. And maybe it's not the family as a whole, it's just a family member. God sees and he knows. And he is the one who will get the final say so on the end result of those exchanges. So you can be encouraged tonight. If nothing else, just looking at Cain and Abel allows us to really get, as I said before, some kind of ironic peace that if it is our family that is experiencing dysfunction, you're not the first one, you're not the only one. This has been happening since the beginning of time with the first family and the first siblings. So God was there then, able to handle it, and God is here now, able to handle it. I hope that this has somehow helped you. We're going to be on a journey in September looking at bloody bloodlines. Have a few more faith siblings that we're going to examine to get some tangible tips and nuggets to take away. As always, if this Bible study has helped you, I request that you subscribe and that you share. And then, as always, additionally, I honor the greatness in you. Take care. Have a fantastic week. New upload next week as we continue this series.